All right, everyone. About to watch Jordan Peterson, Exodus, and eat some pizza. So here we freaking go. Gotta make sure my stream's going here. It is. Okay. Here we go.
Well, there are serpents, and so maybe the mother can chase away all the serpents, right? But then the mother's the serpent. And so you want to fortify your people. You want to make them strong. And that's what's happening symbolically here. And that's so damn brilliant. It's amazing that it's encapsulated.
So they're talking about the snakes when the snakes are biting the Israelites, and then they have to look at the idol of the snake, and the snakes won't poison them.
In this story. But then there's an even weirder twist. And I'll get Jonathan to start the comment on this, because Christ says of himself in the Gospels that he has to be lifted up like this brazen serpent in the desert. And that's a very strange thing for someone to say, because why would Christ assimilate himself to, of all things, a serpent on a post? And then why does he say that he has to be lifted up? And I think the answer to that is that part of what the gospel story does, the Passion of Christ, is it aggregates all the serpents. It's like the gospel, the Passion of Christ is at minimum, it's an account of all the terrible things that could possibly happen to you in your life if all the terrible things that could happen in a life happened to you. So it's like, it's all the serpents. The crucifixion is all the serpents at once. It's betrayal, and it's death, and it's torture, and it's unjust death, and it's being selected for death over a criminal, and it's betrayal of your best friend. It's like everything. And the idea there is that if that is confronted voluntarily and radically accepted, it's simultaneously transcended. And the fact that those narratives stack on top of one another, and they do that because of this reference that Christ makes back to the serpent, is just, I just can't believe that. It's absolutely beyond comprehension.
Can I just quickly ask, speaking as a clinician, what does that mean? Let's say you mentioned betrayal. Let's say someone is terrified or afraid of betrayal. What does it mean to
confront it?
To confront it, practically.
Well,
how do you do that?
Well, part of it is you do it practically. You get the details of the story. Exactly what happened. Exactly how did this occur? Look at every single detail. Then you help people think, were there weaknesses in your approach that made it more likely that this would occur? So, for example, maybe there's a history of you being betrayed. It's happened to you 4 times, and it's taken you out each time. It's like, well, once, it's the other person. Twice, it's the other person. 3 times, it's you. And so then often what you find in therapy is that people who are betrayed repeatedly are far too trusting and naive. They're too childlike, they're too dependent, they haven't looked on enough serpents in their life, they don't have the eyes of, they're all dove and no snake. And so they get betrayed all the time. And so you help them, and then you also help them contend with the fact of the potential that they could betray people. So there's that evil within them, like Harry Potter being, touched with the soul of Voldemort and being able to talk to snakes. They have to make contact with that possibility within them. And then generally they have to learn to be aggressive. Because people who are naive and then lay themselves open to psychopathic manipulation generally don't have any aggression incorporated within them. So they also have to confront the idea of the serpent within. And so that's part of the way you would step through that.
Can you finish your sentence? Having people gaze upon what frightens them. Please finish the sentence. It's
fortifies
awesome.
them.
Fortifies
them. And that's that. See, the behaviorists faced opposition from the psychoanalysts when they first implemented exposure therapy. The psychoanalysts said, look, they say they're afraid of an elevator, but really the elevator is only a symbol for something like death. And so if you teach them to not be afraid of the elevator, a death fear will just pop up somewhere else. You'll get symptom substitution. And so there's a big argument in the psychological community about this. But what happened is, that isn't what happened. But here's why. It's so cool. So I had a client who was afraid of an elevator. And so what we did, first of all, I had her look at pictures of elevators. And that was enough for her for a while. And then we'd go out in the hallway, and she'd stand like 100 feet away and just look at an elevator. And the rule was, walk near the elevator till you're nervous, stop, and then just wait till you're not nervous. But look at the damn elevator. When you take someone inside an elevator, they'll look at their feet. You have to say, no, you got to look at the numbers, the display where you are. You have to look at the control panel. You have to investigate with your central vision every element of what you're avoiding, because otherwise you won't accustom yourself to it. You won't get braver. And so then you just put the person on the edge, and then maybe by 3 sessions, they're like right next to the elevator. So now I have my client right next to the elevator, and she hasn't done that for years. I said, look, you have to establish a relationship of trust before you can do this. I said, look, I'm going to push the doors are going to open, and then I'm going to hold the door. And I won't play any tricks. I'm not going to do anything to startle you, because that's a big mistake in those circumstances. I just want you to just look in, and that'll be enough for today. And so she looks in and she goes, that's a tomb. And I thought, yes, that's exactly right, because for her, see, the fantasy for someone who's afraid of an elevator, it's very, very standard fantasy. I'll get trapped in there, the lights will go out, I'll start to have heart palpitations that are indication of a heart attack, because lots of people who have elevator phobias have panic attacks, and they're afraid they're going to have a heart attack. I won't be able to get to the hospital and find a figure of authority. I'll die here. And it'll be even worse if there are people who are in the elevator, because I'll make a bloody fool of myself and humiliate myself, and then I'll die. And so they get both fears, fear of social rejection and humiliation, and of death. But so when they do encounter the elevator and walk in past the threshold, they are walking into the tomb. They're playing out the symbolic realm and the practical realm simultaneously. And that does generalize. And so one of the things you see very frequently in therapy, if you teach people to be more assertive, particularly happens with women, is that, you know, they're dependent and afraid, and so they're over-dependent on their husband, and so then their husband can tyrannize them. And so then you walk the woman through exposure therapy, and she gets braver, and then she'll go home and have a fight with her husband. And husbands often resist the transformation, because as the woman becomes braver by looking at the serpents, she's more willing to take on the tyrant in her husband. And then you get familial resistance to the movement towards health on the part of the client, because, you know, maybe he's all accustomed to having this wife who, you know, never says boo. And that's not so good for him, because she's not very interesting, but, you know, at least he gets to do whatever he wants whenever he wants. It's a stupid trade, but lots of people will make it. But it's so cool that, well, that's in this story, that's the best way to deal with serpents, is not to get rid of them, but to look at them. Like,
and we
God,
made the
it's
point
so
earlier,
wise.
didn't we, another session, that this is why the whole safety culture in universities is so idiotic. I mean, trigger warnings and, I mean, that, you know, what can be, in a sense, more transforming in a deeply spiritual sense than confronting the inevitable suffering of the human condition.
This is why I'm appalled by my professional colleagues. It's like they all know, all of them know, that not only is the idea that you should protect your students from triggers wrong, it's not just wrong. It's the opposite of what you should do. It's not just a lie, it's an anti-truth. They all know that. They won't come out and talk about it.
There's
some of them.
There's two other little pieces I just wanted to comment on. One is that, again, it's like an inoculation, right? So that's another level.
You bet.
Right, because you
That's what a pharmacon is. It's a hair of the dog that bit you.
Yeah.
And the idea was a tiny bit of the poison will cure you. Yeah.
And the other thing that's really interesting in this is that, like you said, well, why doesn't he just get rid of all the snakes? And your analysis, when you're talking about like habituation doesn't work and that you grow less afraid, the fact is you grow stronger. And that's one of the things, is when confronting something, it's so interesting, it's always with you. Your sins are always with you. Your flaws are always with you. You grow up the other parts of yourself stronger in relation to them. Right? And so if you take away the snakes, it takes away the problem. But they're carrying away, you have to carry that fear all the way through. And so much of this is about trying to figure out how to contain. I mean, the Israelites they're like a dark, victim-y reflection of Pharaoh's stubbornness again and again and again. It's the other version of that. But they have to grow another part of themselves bigger. That part's always going to be there. There's the golden calf, and 2 minutes later, you're striking the rod twice, and 2 minutes later, right, the ground's opening up and swallowing people. It's the other parts that have to be strengthened.
Right. Well, it's so interesting, because there's I don't remember what the study of the justification of suffering is called. You know, to justify God despite the fact that the world is rife with suffering.
Theodicy.
Theodicy. Okay, so what's the theodicy? Is no adventure without danger. Okay, but danger brings up the theodicy problem, right? If it's real danger, if it's real peril, what about the suffering of children? And the answer to that is something like, be better. Not have the danger go away, not make everything into a peaceful paradise where, you know, the naive can dance and play without fear. That's not it. It's something like, you know, form yourself into the guise of a holy warrior in the most real sense, so that you can contend with dragons, not so that they cease to exist. And it's so interesting too, because you have this fundamental myth that's unbelievably old, oldest story we have. I would say it's told in every adventure story. Well, there's no dragons. Well, then there's no gold, because it's always the dragon that hoards the gold. So does it mean too that if you get rid of the dragons, you make everything hyper safe? Is there's no gold? And that certainly seems to be the case. Is you take the spirit out of people by making things hyper safe, but you might also deprive them of the deepest treasure. And I do talk to my audiences about this around the world. It's like, do you want to be happy, satiated, comfortable, safe, secure? Like, if you could have what you wanted, is that what you want? And if it is, how is that different from just being an infant who's asleep? Because you don't even need to be conscious if that's your life. Because you can just seek into unconsciousness when you're satiated. That's what you do after a Thanksgiving meal. You want to be awake. Well, why? Because you have an adventure to undertake. Well, what's the adventure? Well, dragons everywhere, right? But the idea here would be, if you can adopt the right attitude towards the dragon transforms itself into gold. That's actually the story of the resurrection, most fundamentally, right? Is that if you accept your catastrophic destiny thoroughly, what you get out of that isn't death and humiliation and the descent into hell. What you get is the eternal resurrection of the human spirit. And that's a walloping story, because it turns out to be, you see that in clinical practice over and over again, is that the person grows in proportion to their willingness to voluntarily confront the tragedy of their life. And then you might say, well, what if you did that completely? Like, I mean, I know it's a receding goal and an impossibility, but it still begs the question. If you took that all onto yourself as voluntarily as you could, the whole bloody mess, as voluntarily as you could, do you simultaneously transmute it? And I mean, all the micro stories indicate that the answer to that is yes. So that's something, man.
This story, I mean, it's one of the stories that I've thought about the most in my life. I wrote an entire play around the meaning of the story and how it's one of the stories that brought me to become Orthodox. It's difficult to explain, but you know, until the beginning, since we started this, I'm trying to avoid always talking about Jesus. Like I do end up bringing him in. I'm sorry, but I try to avoid
smuggling.
Just Jesus smuggling, right? But this is a moment where I'm gonna do it, because I think that the story of the crucifixion is so difficult to understand. It is so, you look on that story and it is so confusing, and we have an intuition. Some people have an intuition that there's something right about it, and we can kind of see it, but it wrecks everything in terms of our narrative. And we have a hint of that in the story of the bronze serpent. In the Garden of Eden, God says, don't eat the fruit or you will die. And then the serpent says, if you eat the fruit, you will be like God. And in some ways, the secret is yes and yes. That's the secret. The secret is, what you see in the story of Jesus is someone who is willing to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and die. Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between him and Adam. Mm-hmm. And there are many images in the story of the crucifixion to show us that that's what he's doing. He's standing between a good thief and a bad thief. There are many images to show us that what he's doing is eating the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and is willing to die. And then that death becomes glory.
Well, you see that as a pattern too. There's this great medieval image that made an unbelievable impact on me when I saw it. And so it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life at the same time. And on the one side, there's Eve handing out skulls, apples, to people, and that's the distribution of death. And on the other side, there's Mary, who I think it's a representation of the true church in feminine form, and she's handing out wheaten hosts, and they're also fruits of the tree. And the idea there is that the incorporation of the pattern of Christ's voluntary sacrifice is the medication for the death that's produced as a consequence of the fall. Yeah. And that's, and then to speak of that psychologically only, which is what I'll try to do here, is to say that the idea there is that the medication for the nihilism-inducing, despair-inducing catastrophe of tragedy is not to protect yourself from it or to veil yourself from it, to shield yourself from it, but to voluntarily confronted and investigated in every painful detail, all of the catastrophe, and that paradoxically alleviates the catastrophe.
But it's also redemptive, isn't it? I mean, I think Jonathan's absolutely right. It's kind of inevitable, particularly for Christians, to interpret that this kind of Christologically or kind of proleptically looking forward, because that description of that Christ of being lifted up as the serpent is followed immediately by possibly the most famous verse in the whole of the New Testament, John 3:16. So John's own explication is following that lifting up phrase, one of three, I think, in the New Testament, is God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever should believe in him should not perish but have eternal life.
Right,
So it was a kind of antidote here in Numbers, an antidote to the poison, an antidote to the consequences of their wrongdoing.
Well,
but it's transmuted into eternal life and salvation in the New
with
Testament.
regards to the idea, and correct me where I get this wrong, of the Christological voyage in the Orthodox Church, my understanding of that psychologically is that the degree to which you are capable of acting in a redemptive fashion in the world, so following in the footsteps of Christ, let's say archetypally, is precisely proportionate to the degree that you're willing to voluntarily confront and bear the suffering of life. Then you think, well, you got to think about that practically. It's like, well, how could that possibly be any different? How could it be any different than that? Because you do owe God a death, and you're going to be betrayed, and all of these catastrophes are implicit in your destiny, and then you kind of have, there's only two ways to go about that. One would be, well, I'm not paying any attention to that, that's for sure. But everyone knows perfectly well that how often do you solve a problem by not paying attention to it? Like everybody knows, pretending it's not there. Everybody knows that just makes problems multiply. So you have to confront a problem to solve it. And so then you might say, well, do you have to confront the problem of problems to solve it? And the answer to that could easily be yes. And then the question is, well, how radical could the solution be? And I would say, well, it seems clear to me from the people I've met who have acted in some redemptive capacity in the world that that's directly proportionate to their existential courage. Those things just seem like bound together inextricably. And so, well, I guess what that means in part is, well, the biblical stories have to be stories about us because, obviously, right, because they're stories about us. And then the question is, well, how deep does that go? And that brings us back to the idea, too, that we're all made in the image of God, you know, and that it's incumbent upon us to act that out in our life to the degree that we can. And then you might say, well, what's the ultimate consequence of acting that out ultimately? And the answer is, well, that's what you find out in your life. But who knows what the upper limit of that is? Certainly you know in the micro details that the people you admire spontaneously, the people even that you might be in awe of, are the people who have borne more than their share of the existential catastrophe of life. And they certainly gleam, their faces shine as a consequence of their capacity to do that. And sometimes unbearably, right? Because they're also simultaneously judges. That person has attained such stature that
I just
I'm
ate 2
embarrassed in his
pizzas.
presence. I think those are just practical realities. So it's a hell of a lot of information encapsulated in one little story. So, all right, gentlemen, if we're very careful, we can time this perfectly. On to Deuteronomy and the end of the Exodus seminar. I'll recount from Wikipedia again a brief description of Deuteronomy, and then we'll do 2 parts of it. The book of Deuteronomy is the 5th book of the Torah. Chapters 1 to 30 consist of 3 sermons or speeches delivered to the Israelites by Moses on the plains of Moab, shortly before they enter the Promised Land. The first sermon recounts the 40 years of wilderness wanderings, which had led to that moment, and ends with an exhortation to observe the law. The second reminds the Israelites of the need to follow Yahweh and the laws or teachings on which their possession of the land depends. The third offers the comfort that even should Israel prove unfaithful and lose the land, with repentance all can be restored. So that's a replication of something that we've already discussed: reward, punishment, and the possibility of redemption. The final 4 chapters contain the Song of Moses, the Blessing of Moses, and narratives recounting the passing of the mantle of leadership from Moses to Joshua, and finally the death of Moses on Mount Nebo. And so we'll start with Deuteronomy 30. Which is Moses' warning. 30:11. For this commandment which I command thee this day, It is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. It is not in heaven that thou shouldest say, who shall go up for us to heaven and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it. Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldest say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it unto us, that we may hear it and do it. But the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. It's so interesting that, you know, that searching up the vertical dimension in some way isn't, you're not going to find it there by exhorting the sky. You're not going to find it by going into the earth. You're going to find it, the very word is nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it. See, I have set before thee this day life and good, and death and evil. And that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, and his statutes, and his judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply. And the Lord thy God shall bless thee in the land whither thou goest to possess it. But if thine heart turn away, so that thou wilt not hear, but shall be drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I denounce you unto this day, and that ye shall surely perish, and that ye shall not prolong your days upon the land, whither thou passest over Jordan to go to possess it. I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both thou and thy seed may live. And that's that pro-human injunction, right? That life more abundant. It's a moral duty to celebrate and worship life itself, despite its suffering, that thou and thy seed may live. It's an injunction to courage, existential courage, that thou mayest love the Lord thy God, and that thou mayest obey his voice, and that thou mayest cleave unto him, for he is thy life and the length of thy days, that thou mayest dwell in the land which the Lord swore unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give them. So Moses is reminding his people of their duty to the highest, to the association, and reminding them as well that there's an association between that and the very words that they speak and abide by. And that's that primacy of speech, right? That's an echo of the idea of the divine word, that and the closeness of God to proper speech and accurate speech. And he says too that heaven and earth testify to that, right? So that we talked about that a bit, James, with the emergence of the logos upwards and the heavens and the logos of the heavens downward. And so it's a reminder. And then go ahead.
I would say briefly, thinking of America with the Constitution coming from the Hebrew covenant, this sort of a passage literally overwhelms me at times. I mean, in other words, America, with all the specious forms of freedom, is at this point. And we're talking about today as well as whatever.
You mean this point in making this decision once again?
Exactly. America needs to confront that. You can go one way or the other way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I read from an American historian, and it blew my mind. And tragically for me, I read it right after I had already completed my commentary on Deuteronomy. The American founders, he did a systematic accounting of sources that the founders quoted from the Enlightenment, from the Greeks, the Romans, and from the Bible. All of them. Montesquieu was second from the French Enlightenment. Deuteronomy was number one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
The most quoted book, and Jesus quotes Deuteronomy more than any other book except Psalms.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, gentlemen, let's close with this. Right on time, by the way. The death of Moses, Deuteronomy 34. This great leader, he takes the Israelites out of tyranny. He guides them through the desert. And not only that, he sets up proper order while doing so, and then the very model of order itself, as it cascades down the centuries, the very model of order that those among us who have some degree of wisdom, present company both included and excluded, have set up to guide ourselves with in the manner we just described. This great figure dies, the death of Moses, and outside the promised land, right? Quite the catastrophe. And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan. So he's up on this mountain. He can see possibility itself spread out before him. He can see what he's been journeying to all this time. God shows him that. And all Naphtali and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh and all the land of Judah unto the utmost sea, right into the distance, and the south and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees unto Zor. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swore unto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. And so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him. And the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and the wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land, and in all that mighty hand, and all the great terror which Moses showed in the sight of all Israel.
God buried him. I find this the most touching sentence in the Torah.
And the incredible contrast with Pharaoh. All that surrounds the Pharaoh, you think of King Tut and so on.
Right, and he's buried in anonymity.
Yeah.
But then again, no.
Dude, I've been watching this Exodus series. It's like 2 hours an episode, and this is the last one, so it's like almost 40 hours of Moses, and him dying kind of hits me in the feels. I'm not gonna lie.
Right, because Moses' tomb is the book of Exodus, and it's outlasted everything. Right, so
The man who was-
he got nothing, and yet the most permanent possible tomb imaginable.
Yeah, where's
Right,
the Pharaoh
right.
now, right? The promise of the
We
rod
know
of
of the
Moses.
Pharaoh thanks to this book.
Yeah, well, the promise of the rod of Moses devouring the rod of Pharaoh, which even now scholars today will mock as a bunch of a little tribe that is trying to make themselves better than Egypt. What is the story? The story is that where's the Pharaoh now?
Right.
That happened, right? Egypt
Yeah.
did convert. Egypt did turn to the God of Abraham.
Well, if the rod
Isaac,
of
and Jacob.
Yeah, it's on Daily Wire Plus. I would recommend getting it and watching it. It's a life changer. It's really crazy. I don't necessarily think it's true, but it's super freaking interesting, and it's cool to see all these different guys' perspective on the text.
If the rod of Moses is Mount Sinai, then it's devoured. Then we better pray it devours up all the serpents.
Yes, indeed.
Right.
But the
Right.
Torah begins. This is anyway, the Torah begins with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and ends with the word Israel. My take is the two great creations, the world and Israel.
And Israel, that's we who wrestle with God.
That's it.
And gentlemen, it's two hours on the dot, pretty much, with a minute there for a bit of fringe exception. And that's that. We're going to reconvene and discuss for an hour what we've learned. For now, I'd like to thank everybody who's watching and listening to this 16-part walkthrough of Exodus. I'd like to thank the Daily Wire crew for making this possible, for having the faith to double the length of this venture and to embark with us on this journey. And to everyone who's listening, who's doing the same, I'd like to thank all of you.
I'm gonna
for
hit the
taking
next
a
episode after
substantial
this, so
amount of
just
time
hang on.
out of your busy lives, first on faith, that this might be an enterprise worth undertaking, and then in a spirit of real fellowship to complete it, because it's been a blast. And so,
He's going to cry.
congratulations, men. We made it out of Israel.
Got him. Is the new Jordan Peterson book good? Because I am a Jordan Peterson fan, but I haven't read the new book yet. How do I get the next episode here? I want to go to the last episode.
The American Declaration of Independence says that our rights come.
Stand by. Oh, here we go. There's one last thing. Might as well just bust through this shit. Here we go. Last episode. Here we go. I'm reading the Bible cover to cover right now. This is why I'm watching this, because I'm like reading. As I was reading the Torah, I was like so confused by everything. So this was just helping me think how to think about it. Let's go! Dun, 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 dun.
Hello, everyone watching and listening. We're here for episode 17, an hour long, the finale of the Exodus seminar. And we're going to reflect on the entire voyage and discuss ex hodos, the way forward. And so I'll summarize where we've been and the story as a whole. So the story it's an existential tale, I would say, of the
That's basically what this series is like that kind of exploration. I wonder I think he wrote the book maybe after he did this, because he mentioned that he did this series to understand the book better. And that's why he has all the scholars with him.
Between too much order and too much chaos. That's a way of thinking about it, an exploration of proper governance. And the story begins with the Israelites in captivity as slaves to a tyrant. And I would say to some degree, insofar as we've fallen out of favor or concordance with our tradition, we're all the slavish children of tyrants. Sometimes that's the external tyrant, sometimes that's our own tyrant. And so the story is true psychologically and sociologically at the same time, and that gives it kind of an eternal truth. So the Israelites are laboring under the yoke of the Egyptians, and a leader arises, Moses, who's called by God to chastise the tyrant, implying that there is a divine spirit of sovereign power in whose nature is the proclivity to punish the tyrant, and also a call to the Israelites to free themselves from the yoke of the tyrant. And so God is portrayed as the spirit that inspires the enslaved, the unjustly enslaved, to free themselves. And so Moses is their unwilling leader, not a gifted man verbally, but nonetheless touched by God to have this inspiring capacity. And he is enjoined by God to stand up against the tyrant and to tell him, the Pharaoh, that unless his people are let go, all hell is going to break loose, which it does in the form of a multitude of plagues, which we analyzed in some detail, plagues that destroy both the present of the Egyptians and their future in the last plague, the death of the firstborn. The Israelites are then sent out into the desert by the Egyptians, who are finally terrified by the God their sorcery cannot duplicate, and in a last-ditch attempt to establish their tyrannical sovereignty, they decide to kill the Israelites and end up drowned in the Red Sea. And then the Israelites have escaped from the tyrant. And this is where the story, I think...
Quick thing here, as I was thinking of this, right? The Israelites are trying to get out of Egypt and get out from under Egypt's tyranny. And then after they go across the Red Sea and all the Egyptians get killed, they just have a shitty time in the wilderness. It's like this, it's like hella time where they're just not doing good in the wilderness, right? It's all this bullshit. I was like, damn, they could probably have just, since the Pharaoh and all the Egyptians got killed in the Red Sea when they were following them, they could have just pulled up back to Egypt and ran the shit, right? It says there was 2 million, or not 2 million, what was it? 600,000 or something. But Israelites, so it's interesting in the story, you think they could have just been oh, they're all dead now, let's roll back to Egypt and just run it because, you know, their whole shit's destroyed. But obviously that doesn't let the moral and the narrative of the story unfold how it needs to. But it's just an interesting thought.
Becomes even more realistic. It's so profoundly and remarkably and surprisingly realistic, because it's easy for naive people to think that once you've escaped from the tyrant, you're scot-free. And the scot-freedom is you can do whatever you want, whenever you want. But it turns out that's the desert. And so Exodus story juxtaposes two extremes at the top and the bottom of human life, you might say. And one is an extreme of order, and that's tyranny, but the other is an extreme of chaos. And that's this desert-like freedom where, sure, you're free, but where are you going and which way is up and can you do anything at all? And you're lost, and the Israelites are lost in the desert, and it's not pleasant, and it's not even obvious that it's better than the tyranny. And so they get all whiny and squawky and complain, and they're miserable and lost. And then they fall prey to the temptation to elevate Moses to the role of Pharaoh, and he almost falls prey to the temptation to become that. He sits as their judge. And his father-in-law, Jethro, shows up and says, look, you can't do this, Moses. You're going to wear yourself to a frazzle judging this fractious people from dawn till night, and you're in danger of becoming a tyrant yourself. Plus, your people, granted, they're completely useless, but unless you give them some responsibility, they're going to stay that way. So Jethro introduces the principle of what comes to be known as history progresses as subsidiarity. And it's so cool, and I didn't really understand this about the text, is that not only does the text interrogate the nature of tyranny and its proclivity to double down, and the nature of slavery and the probability that that will be accompanied by a kind of craven, resentful, cowardly murmuring and bitterness, but it also lays out the archetype of ordered freedom as the antithesis to the tyrant and to the chaos of the desert. And the ordered freedom is like a hierarchy of intermediation between that which is in the highest place and the people themselves. And it involves the construction of a hierarchical structure of responsibility. And that's the true antithesis to the tyrant. And it's the solution to the problem of the Tower of Babel. And it's the solution to the problem of how to make the infinite manifest in the finite without having the infinite wreak havoc on the finite. And I didn't know that really before we walked through this seminar. And it's so illuminating to understand that that's the basis of the idea of good governance, both conceptually and practically. So that's ridiculously interesting and cool. And so the principle of subsidiary is established. Moses gets the laws. They're a little too intense, and the Israelites immediately fall prey to their fractiousness and start to worship idols. And that means they lose faith in the spirit that has guided them out of tyranny and into the desert. And the covenant is then, the tablets are broken, the covenant is reestablished with a bit less divine force, you might say, although it's also prolonged. And then they fall prey to all the temptations of an established state. They become lustful, and what that means in this situation is, well, they're kind of secure, and they got their subsidiary structures in place, but now they cultivate their own longings, and they invent privations, and they transform themselves into pathetic victims, even though they have absolutely no reason to do so, and that shakes the state to its foundation. And they move forward still to the degree that they can, motivated by the vision of the promised land, but that falls apart too, and they become faithless. And so God nonetheless keeps his covenant with them. This is something I found particularly interesting about the text too, and I didn't understand this exactly. So, you know, modern people they'll dismiss the idea of a covenantal relationship, the idea that you actually have a personal relationship with God. That's just obviously the most primitive of superstitions. But you know, what's so interesting about this text is that it insists, psychologically speaking, that the proper polity is to be modeled after the idea of a relationship, and a relationship of sacrifice and bargaining, and that if you organize yourself properly psychologically and socially, it's as if you're developing a relationship. That's the right metaphor. It's relationship. It's not contractual subjugation. It's not abiding by a set of rules or even a set of principles. They're there, but they're echoes of the covenantal relationship. And the proper relationship is put forth as something like, well, the possibility of communicating with the infinite in a personal manner, predicated on the assumption that you're in something like a father-son relationship, and that's the most appropriate way to conduct yourself if you're going to thrive, if your family is going to thrive, and if your state is going to survive and wax more abundant. And you know, it seems to me that that's, not only is that right, but I think in some ways it's necessarily right, because biologically speaking, you are a personality, and the personality exists in relationship, and you wouldn't have evolved into a personality if the personality in relationship wasn't the proper mode of being in the world. And so not only does it seem right, it seems inevitable, but it's still very surprising that the right metaphor is covenantal relationship. And then this absurdly optimistic assumption that not only is this a covenantal relationship that's personal with something that's best characterized as a spirit, even with human qualities, but that's But that's the necessary foundation for a state that's neither tyranny nor chaos. I mean, that's something. That's an utterly revolutionary idea. And I think its revolutionary force also struck me walking through this Exodus seminar, because I kind of knew that, but not as explicitly as has been revealed to me as a consequence of this journeying. So that was really something. And the story closes with the death of Moses. He never gets to the promised land, and perhaps none of us do, no matter how remarkably we comport ourselves in this life, and that seems realistic. And the story, as it nears its end, also insists upon the necessity of confronting that which terrifies you and poisons you the most voluntarily, and that's a mode of redemption. It ends with the statement by God that there are rewards for following the covenant and punishments for not doing so, and the rewards are major and the punishments are dire, but that even if you deviate, there's the possibility of return to the relationship, which I think that's about as hopeful a statement as you could possibly hope for. And we get a good lesson about what constitutes proper leadership out of the story as well. Moses is not a tyrant. He's not self-aggrandizing. He has a proclivity towards narcissism from time to time, but he keeps it damn well under control. And he's always attempting to subordinate himself vertically to God and staying in communication with his people, difficult as that is. And so he's a great model for true leadership. And he's also the person who introduces and is open to and abides by the principle of subsidiarity. So he's not gathering all the power unto himself, even though that's a temptation from time to time. I think that's brutally realistic and flies in the face of any sort of accusation on the part of, let's say, rationalist atheists that there's nothing to these stories but like a superstitious, what would you say, defense against death anxiety and a post hoc justification for the nature of God. It's like, no, this is pretty brutal and it's pretty realistic. And so it's been extraordinarily fun, and I've learned a tremendous amount, and it's been a privilege and an honor to be part of this. That's for sure. And so, so now we'll find out. We're going to go around the table one by one, and we're going to let everybody reflect on the story and what they've learned, and take the opportunity to say anything they want to say. And James, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you, Jordan, and thank you, everyone. I mean, looking back on these 16 episodes, it's impossible to distill everything. I've learned so much, but I think more than that, I've been moved so much. At almost every episode, there's been some moment that has not just sort of illuminated me cognitively, intellectually, but has moved me deeply. And I'm just thinking about the enormous popularity that of the first series, and I wonder, why is that? And I'm just thinking, if this had been a more kind of formal university seminar or a seminar in a seminary, we'd have been looking at the sorts of questions and themes and problems that we just haven't touched on at all. Like, there's a whole guild of scholarship that approaches these texts in a completely different way. Questions of historicity, like, did this happen? How did it happen? When did it happen? Is it plausible that it happened? Questions of authorship, the sort of different layers, the different editorial hands that are at work in the different texts. And all of that it's legitimate scholarship, of course. It's a legitimate avenue of kind of human inquiry. But it's not been our approach. I mean, that approach, I was thinking about this earlier today, that approach tends to generate a kind of a mosaic that doesn't produce a very clear picture. Lots of little different editors, lots of different authors, lots of different schools of interpretation. We've been approaching it as mosaic, capital M, in the sense that we've been approaching it as we've kind of bracketed those questions. We haven't said that it's a false way of doing things, or it's a true way of doing things, but we've kind of done an end run around all of that. We've treated it as mosaic. We've treated it, in other words, as a single, unified vision that stresses story and symbol, and also the third S, the sacred. I mean, this is what's been most interesting and moving for me. You know, we've all got our different confessional commitments. Some of us may not have any confessional commitments at all, but we've approached this text with reverence, and we've been treating it really just very seriously, and we've been open to mining its riches. And I think that is just so important and accounts for the success of the conversations. And
maybe to revere a text is to allow it to open itself up to you. I mean, that might be exactly the issue.
I think so. So we've seen, on the story side, I mean, it's just that the narrative logic's been brought alive for me by, Greg has been great on the storytelling side, and Jonathan too, and the symbolism, you've brought that out, and Jonathan has too, but also, as I said, we've all got our different commitments, and we've been understanding it through our different faith traditions, as it were.
Yeah, nobody ever asked the question in the seminar, why are we taking this text seriously, right? That was an a priori commitment. And it's interesting that was the case and that it never came up as an issue, right?
We've come back again and again. I think this is what I found so moving, that it's not been that we've been reading Exodus, but that Exodus has been reading us. We've learned new things about ourselves. We've learned new things about society. It's generally not been a very political discussion either, and yet we've seen the enormous kind of political ramifications, the new ways we can understand the problems of affecting society and culture through this ancient text. It's just been remarkable for that reason. So those have been the things I've taken away. I mean, the text itself. What is there more to say? I mean, I work in philosophy. I spent a lot of time reading the ancient Greeks, reading contemporary philosophy. It's really, you might say that the world of Plato and Aristotle is sort of the world of the timeless and of the abstract, the world of logic. And we have had some of this. So famously, in Exodus 3:14, there is this sense that God is, as it were, beyond time. Is like, as in Plato, he sort of occupies that heaven beyond the cave. And yet it's not just that. It's a God who comes down into the cave, who is moved, who shows his compassion, who breaks into history, I think. We tend to have this very bifurcated way of thinking about history. I mean, either as random in some sense, or perhaps as determined in the Marxist sense, or as always heading in a particular kind of progressive direction. Or we sort of have the kind of timeless logical approach of the sort of the rationalists. And what we see here in these texts is a fusion of those two traditions. We see it's got both. We can see, obviously, it's an enormous contribution to the Christian intellectual tradition, but we see in it, as it were, glimpses of the Hellenic as well, glimpses of the Greek tradition. And that's been remarkable for me, this idea that for the first time here we see that the idea that history has a direction. But it's not a random direction, it's not fully determined, it takes seriously human freedom, it accommodates human failure, and it unfolds always not just in a kind of random dynamic flux, but against an objective transcendent standard of the good, of moral order, of political order, and of social order.
With a tremendous insistence that at its basis, the fundamental order is both good and relational.
And personal, exactly.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Dennis.
So I'll say a personal word and then a global word. So on the personal, to be self-revealing, I have this theory, and I hope I don't think I did say this at any of our sessions, but I've had this theory a long time. There are many ways of dividing people, right? There are those who this, there are those who that. So one of my divisions is there are those who want to be stars, and there are those who want to be on an all-star team. And I am in the latter. I have never, my joy is to be on an all-star team. So that's what I have felt for all these seminars, all our sessions. And that's a great honor and a much greater joy than being a star. I mean, what I have learned from each of you is emotionally as well as intellectually rewarding. I intend to bring a lot of these ideas to the audience that I have through my radio and PragerU and my little synagogue in Los Angeles. So this is a big thank you to all of you. I don't have much to add. I just want to say one large thing that I thought of the entire time. I don't think that there's a secular equivalent to what we have done here. I don't think there can be a secular equivalent.
Why not?
Because secularism doesn't produce wisdom. That's why. I'm convinced of that, and I have proof. It's not a theory. The most secular institutions in our society have the least wisdom, the universities. So either what I'm saying is true or not true. But if it's true that the least wise institutions are the most secular, it is causative. It's not just correlated. They are, it is a factor. And the great line from the Bible, what is it? Again, I got to go from the Hebrew. Wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. When I was at Columbia, and it's on the internet, I wrote this 25 years ago, how I found God at Columbia. So I was at the Graduate School of International Relations, or International Affairs. And I was already then learning nonsense. Men and women are basically the same. That was already taught to me in the 1970s. And America and Soviet Union, they're just both superpowers. This was not a battle of good and evil or freedom and tyranny. It was two superpowers. I remember the analogy given by my professor, two scorpions in a bottle. So I was learning nonsense, and it was driving me a little crazy. And I never, except once in my life, had an epiphany. I've never had a theophany. God has never appeared to me. I mean, he appears to me in the pages of the Torah, to be honest, but never appeared to me directly in any way. But I had an epiphany. All of a sudden, as I kept asking myself, why is there so much nonsense here from such intelligent people? That phrase, wisdom begins with the fear of God, came to me. I had last said it in second grade in my Jewish school. I had not said it since second grade. And it just came into my brain. And then I realized, oh, there's no wisdom here because there's no God here. I would now even refine it. There was no wisdom there because there was no Bible there. Because there are people who believe in God who are fools. But the Bible is a repository of wisdom. So when I said, I don't think there's a secular equivalent, and you said, what do you mean? That's what I mean. And I want the viewers and listeners to this to understand that. If you've been uplifted by this, tell me what secular equivalent has uplifted you like this has. That's my challenge to the people watching or listening to this. I have summarized my 40 years of broadcasting, and I've said it all 40 years. I have one overwhelming message: the deleterious consequences of secularism. And this has just reinforced that in
I think,
me.
you know, I talked to Douglas Murray about this with Jonathan at one point, and one of the things Murray has been brought to, I would say, kicking and screaming in some real sense, and I would put myself in the same category, is that it seems likely that the secular is inevitably grounded in a narrative. There's no way out of that. It's grounded in a narrative. Now, you can debate about what that narrative is and should be, but I don't think you can debate that it has to be grounded in a narrative. And a narrative is a narrative. If it's to be a narrative, it is a narrative of something approximating relationship. And so I think your argument is technically correct, is that the secular is groundless. And if the secularists claim detachment from a narrative, all that means is that either their narrative is fragmented or it's unconscious. So,
Well, I'll just end with this. There's no way out. I mean, if you're intellectually honest and secular, life is pointless. End of issue. It is pointless. We don't believe life is pointless at this table. That's the point. Jewish, Orthodox, Christian, Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. We know there's a point. We don't know exactly what. I don't claim to, but I know that there is.
Do we know, or do we posit that in abiding faith and move forward courageously as a consequence?
Posit that in abiding faith and move forward as a consequence.
Okay, all right, Craig.
Well, thank you for gathering us.
Oh, that was good shit.
This has been an amazing experience for me. A lot of you, most of you are new to me. Blackwood and I go back, Jonathan Pajot and I go back a ways, but the rest of you, it's been remarkable, and remarkable to meet you here and at this table and in this manner. One of the things that starts to emerge, I've been in some writers' rooms, and what's fun is you start to understand personalities and perspectives of who's going to come with this kind of joke and who's going to unstick this kind of plot point. So it's very interesting, I notice, as we evolve through the series, who I am looking to almost without, not consciously thinking of, like, well, Oz, I need to ask you something, and Douglas, there's something that I need you to weigh in on, or where I'm curious or looking for different commentaries. And so I think one of the things that's amazing is when you have, there's a variety of perspectives here, as much as we're all joined in a common unity and rowing towards a common goal. There's a lot of variation in the ways that we see the world, and the ways that we find meaning, and the ways that we approach the text. And it's really compelling for me to see it depicted in so many ways. It's like, you know, a dude descending a staircase, right, exploded like a Rubik's Cube, right? There's all these perspectives into a different unified whole that we can kind of behold.
So we got a good Mount Sinai arrangement here, is that a reasonable amount of diversity within an encompassing unity. And that manifested itself in the integrity of the conversation.
Yeah, I think we have about as much as we could take at this stage. We wouldn't want it to stretch even further yet.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I'm thinking, of course, moving between different worlds, which I don't want to give names to or labels to, because we've had so much definitional collapse, I don't even know what names and things mean. But I move between different communities and different worlds freely and frequently, in which there's a lot of wisdom and resources and goodwill and genius. And in the back of my head, I'm always thinking about, if I could bring the best of all these different types of groups together, like the extent if we could marry that we could be unstoppable as a people, as a country.
Well, that would be good if we could figure out how to make those voices that are noting the utility and necessity of the fringe together with the voices that are noting the utility of the unifying spirit.
That's right.
And honest dialogue. That's one of the reasons I like talking to Russell Brand, for example.
Yeah.
Because
comedians are honest.
Yeah. Well, and he's a pretty good advocate of the fringe.
That's right.
And rightly so.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I keep thinking, of course, a lot of the ways that I think and move, part of why I move between so many communities is I really genuinely love people, and I love all different kinds of people. And I'm always thinking about the ways, a lot of my natural state when I'm navigating between different groups is to think about mediation and interpretation in some ways. And so I'm not armed. I have a more embodied understanding of so much from both the text and from all of you and the ways that you all move in the world to understand and to make connections that are sometimes difficult to forge through from one corner to another, and to see all the points of connection and also to see a lot of the opportunities.
I think one of the advantages of walking through a really profound text is that it shows you how things are united, that look diverse, are united deeply underground, and then you can bring things together that you wouldn't be able to bring together without that. You're particularly good at that, by the way, Jonathan. So.
And you know, what I'll now term the Pageauian fringe, that concept is, that's an amazing concept of the different kinds of monsters, right? We have the monsters of too muchness, right? Of sort of authoritarian deemed purity on the one hand, and then the explosive hybridization on the other, and the ways that those have to be navigated, and what's the center that we have to agree on, and what are the voices that bring different voices in and join at a table or a tabernacle or at a mountain. So that was very compelling to me also. And I would say, you know, Oz has talked a lot about, in the covenant, about freely chosen consent. I've thought about that a great deal since the last session, of that being sort of a baseline, not just for the political and not just for the religious, but for the personal, for every engagement in parenting, relationally, right? What are all the ways that I seek to exert some kind of control over something, an endeavor even, a relationship, parenting, right? Freely chosen consent as being a key unifying goal seems so essential.
Well, also, and maybe an indicator of the immanence of the transcendent, right? If you can structure the relationship so that you maximize the consent of the person you're in relationship with, that could easily be a marker that the proper spirit of dialogos exists in that relationship.
And there's such a clarity in Exodus. It's such clarity of the necessity for subservience to a higher order. And one of the things that I like so much in this is that the Israelites exhaust every other option that's available to them. They try and mess up every conceivable way, right? Redefining the past, lying about what they've just seen, right? Claiming glory for themselves. And it reminds me all the time, you know, those haunted house movies where you're like, why don't they just leave the house, right? and when you're working on a project like that, you're like, well, the phones are out because there's a storm and they can't reach the cops, right? And there's a flat tire, right? And somebody said, you know, there was an angry staff member who savaged the road out, and you have to cover all the bases. And Exodus, in some ways, is a meticulous and exceptional covering of all the bases to any argument that you...
All the way a state can go wrong, a state and a people can go wrong.
All the ways you can try to not be subservient to a higher order in a way that's defined and uphold the world of your covenant, right? So you need to do that, and you can't just run out of the haunted house because no one's going to really care or believe it. So it proves its case with great wisdom and magnanimity. So
that's also what makes it a great work of literature, right? Because it's like when Dostoevsky writes Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, the murderer, has every reason you can think of to be a murderer. Right, he goes right to the limits of the realm of possibility. And so if the Passion story is an exploration of the limits of the tragedy of life, your point here is that Exodus is an archetypal examination of all the ways that a state and polity can go wrong.
Yes.
Right. Yeah,
and so that's an amazingly illuminated path, because you can't just lay out the story, right? You have to lay out the avenues of all the other ways of why this is the illuminated path through this labyrinth of pharaohs and snakes and drowning seas and serpents and plagues and locusts. And so the other thing that I would say is that so much for me of my arrival or appreciation of faith is sort of the light of God shown on Michelangelo, right? Or the light of God shown through Beethoven. Like, it's very hard to listen to the Fourth or the Ninth and feel like that's something that he did, right? The light of God shown on Shakespeare. And so what's so interesting here is I think that one of the things that I've been giving a great deal of thought to about, let's just call it institutions, right? Even when we have a very clear separation, and in my estimation, clear and necessary separation of state and church, or that we have certain secular institutions that need to, or that proceed at a distance from religion or faith, they can't function or flourish without the light of God shown on them or reflected to them. And so that was a very big part for me of this experience of walking through this with the wisdom of this collected cohort, is because it was another way to go back through Exodus, which I haven't read closely since my freshman year of high school, really, and to go through sort of piece by piece and see all the ways that this is a story that we use in some ways as in immersive experience, and also a mirror that you hold up and try to reflect and shine the light of onto every endeavor that we pursue.
Yeah, great. Douglas.
Well, thank you for the invitation to the feast. And if I may be forgiven for a possibly perverse image in a group where there are at least a couple of teetotalers, one might think about the strange phenomenon that a really good bottle of wine tastes in purely aesthetic terms, better in company.
This dude's voice is so crazy. He's like, oh,
When you know that others are also enjoying the wine. And I felt it's been like this.
And yeah, based on Eric's comments about this, I mean, he's obviously tripping, but it's like, I get what he's saying. I mean, there were times along the way where I was like, okay, you know, it would have been interesting to have someone, a skeptic in there challenging their notions and challenging their stuff. But I think they couldn't have accomplished what they did here with that. And I think that's why they chose to do that. So it makes sense, but I don't think there's nothing to Eric's criticism. I partially see what he's saying a little bit.
With this seminar. So thank you very much indeed. What have I taken from it? Well, this is obviously a paradigmatic narrative of pilgrimage. So clearly there's something compelling.
Eric, I thought you were leaving, dude. What is it? Is it interesting? Is that why you're saying it's interesting? You don't have to think it's true. I just think it's incredibly interesting, regardless of what you believe or even if they're right. It's just interesting to see all the perspectives and hear what they're saying. So, you know, if you can decide what you think about it.
About that. And I've found it extraordinary to listen to the explication of that narrative on different levels in terms of the explication of the Torah or the psychological dimension or the philosophical implications. So again, I've learned a great deal from that. And the symbolism, that has been, I'm looking at you, of course, Jonathan, among others, but the typological dimension. And I've been struck by the, I often think of the etymology of symbol, that the symbol is it's the sunbalein, it's the putting together. So symbol is somehow linked to unity. And interestingly, of course, the devil is the diabalein, the one tearing apart. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And of course, we all encounter that tearing apart of evil. So I think that sense of the symbolic unifying power of the text. And obviously, I have a philosophical background, and I've long been troubled by the idea of, is this an arbitrary anthropomorphic deity that we're dealing with in the book of Exodus? And what really emerged for me, particularly in this session or this part of the seminar, is the life-affirming dimension of the God who says, I am that I am. So this affirmation of life in the context, in the mirror of that great source of being that is the God of Exodus. So that celebration of life, I think that's something that came out very strongly for me from the discussions. And finally, I was very moved today by the discussion of the snake confronting the snakes. And in the context of these trigger warnings and the whole obsession with safety, I'm struck by the fact that in another part of the Mediterranean world, in the ancient Mediterranean world, the great theatre of Epidaurus is right next to the site of Asclepius. Now, isn't there something about the healing power of a imaginative tradition that is engaging with the human condition and with human suffering? And we've seen a great deal of suffering, a great deal of conflict, a great deal of failure in this text. As Greg was saying, the failures of the Israelites are egregious. And yet, what comes out of this text but this affirmation, this celebration of life?
At Athens, the great theater where the tragedies were held is just outside the temple, just down the mountain. And so the Athenians had this temple that was associated with this kind of pristine rationality, but right allied with that was the idea that the divine revelation was somehow deeply allied with the dramatic presentation of a sequence of tragedies. And so
I think originally it was in fact the amphitheatre itself was a site of worship. It was where the goat was sacrificed to Dionysus in the annual Dionysia. I think tragedy means, goat song, doesn't it?
Goat song, yep.
So it emerges out of this religious ritual, in effect.
Also a good heavy metal band name. Yeah. Goat song.
all right. Pause.
Thank you. What a privilege to be with
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's like with this dude Eric in the chat who's pissed. It's like, I honestly, I feel like he's being kind of a hater, but it's like I relate because when I'm reading the Bible cover to cover, and when I started reading through the Old Testament, I was extremely frustrated by it. Right? It's like I was like, this is insane. Like, it's just so. As like a literal reading, it's so insane, right? It just makes no sense. Like there's so much contradictory like information and things that just make no sense. And so that's partially why I started watching this series. And what I found upon watching this series is that like when you look at the psychological implications, the metaphorical implications, the kind of deep meaning under the stories, like the stories a lot of times are for lack of a better term, dumb or like don't make any sense because they're aimed at illuminating a underlying truth, right? And so, but when you start to uncover those truths and the things that it's saying and the meaning behind everything, it's incredibly interesting, right? And cool. So it's like you come back around, but at the same time, it's like I relate to what Eric's saying to a certain degree. So I think he's kind of being a douche, but it's like, you know, whatever.
This means a lot to me because these things first came up when I was a student in the 60s. I had just come to faith, and it was widely held that freedom and toleration came from the Enlightenment in revulsion to the wars of religion. So when I came across a better historical understanding that actually, through the Reformation and the rediscovery of Scripture, it was the Torah that had created the interest in the Hebrew Republic, and that was behind certainly the American experiment, but so much of the European interest in freedom. In other words, it struck me then, and it does today more deeply, Exodus should be put alongside Plato's Republic and Aristotle and Machiavelli's Prince and Burke and Montesquieu and people. It is a classic of understanding of humanity, freedom, and politics. And so as we've looked at this, you know, the founding of God's nation, set over against Egypt and its techno-despotism, and Canaan and its earthy, unbridled sexual licentiousness, we're dealing with the same contrast we've got growing in our modern world. And so I've kept thinking of three things constantly in my mind as we've been discussing. One, we've got to stand with our Jewish friends against the appalling rise of anti-Semitism today. The debt we owe to the Jews is incredible and incalculable. Two, Americans should be ashamed if they don't understand this is the roots of their great experiment. They don't realize it. So people talk about Make America Great Again or Restoring the Soul, but they never say, what on earth made America great in the first place? And unless you understand Exodus, you don't understand it. But I go beyond that. And I think we're probably towards the end of the Western civilization. And the future, how is humanity going to create societies that are just and free with high human worth and so on? Here's all the ingredients, and we should be wrestling under the conditions of modernity with what this means. So a lot of that's been in the background of my mind as we've been discussing these things. So obviously, Exodus has three broad movements, very obviously: the Exodus, the covenant, and the presence of God among his people. But for me, the Exodus, many obvious lessons, a very simple one that people forget today: to be free, you have to be set free. We're not naturally free. The covenant, in other words, the way of living together freely, I love the idea, Socrates, the unexamined life is not worth living. What the covenant says, the uninstructed life is not worth living. And I think for me, the reality of the presence of God, and of course, Exodus is so that they may know who I am, the Egyptians and the Israelites. I think today, we've talked to secularism, much of modernity is in Plato's cave. They haven't seen the sun. And what this is about at the end of the day is the need for a massive global awakening to the supernatural. And so we're dealing with things, I think, that are incredibly profound in themselves, as we've seen, but extraordinary significance for the world we're living in.
This idea that, you know, I see this in the humanist atheists, that they make the presumption that the Enlightenment venture was the spirit of enlightened rationality against the dark superstitions of the medieval past and maybe the pre-medieval past. But it is, but there's a there's a worship of a superstition there as well. And the worship of the superstition, as far as I can tell, is something like the temptations of a Luciferian rationalism. It's that there can be a purely intellectual and abstracted endeavor that will lead us to the light. Well, and that in itself is a religious claim, and I do believe that it's the claim of the Luciferian intellect. And
Dr.
the
Faustus.
reason, yes, and the reason for that is that the attribution of the place of the omniscience necessary to guide us forward now becomes within, internal, but also it's allied with the rational mind. And I actually think that's part of the pride of the intellects.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, around the table, we're all intellectuals, and I suspect we've all fallen prey to this temptation is if you are an intellectual, if you are intelligent, let's say, and you're comfortable in this sphere of rational discourse and argumentation, it's easy to presume that that somehow elevates you among other people. And it's easy to presume that because that's worked so well for you and is the thing that maybe marks you out, is that that should be placed on the highest pinnacle. And that's a very dangerous assumption. And it's an assumption that's just as metaphysical as the assumption that it's the God of Israel who's the proper guide through the desert, right? You're going to be under the sway of some spirit. And the Enlightenment rationalists hide that. They say, well, no, we have no God. It's like, yeah, Luciferian presumption is your God. And I really believe that's true. And I think that's the reason the French Revolution went so wrong. And, well, that's one of the reasons the French Revolution went so wrong. So there's no way out of abiding within a narrative. There's no way out of that. And I think the cognitive neuroscientists have become increasingly insistent on that point. And there's many fields of endeavor, intellectual fields of endeavor, that are pointing in exactly the same direction. So the story's the thing, right? And the question then becomes, what's the greatest story? What's the greatest story ever told? And certainly Exodus is in contention for that title. Stephen.
Gosh, there's so much to think about. It's really on my mind right now is thinking about the dynamic of this group, and I've been trying to think about the origins of that. And
This dude's got the best fashion, in my opinion. He's always freaking dripped up. Look at that suit, dude. Look at that's freaking gas.
what's developed over these 16 seminars, which actually took place over 2 sessions, about 6 months apart. And I was thinking about how that came about.
What's up, Eric? Welcome back, dog.
What the background is, and I remember, of course, many people know of this, but there was this. We were in Cambridge a few years ago, and we had a little chat with Douglas and Roger Scruton, as you'll recall. And it was your first time in Cambridge, and we were walking around, and you were just, wow, what a beautiful place. And I remember you said, do you think there's any chance I could come back here? And not that it was up to me, I was just a visitor like you, but Douglas invited you back to Cambridge to a fellowship, which was then canceled. And it was very sad. I found it very sad because your enthusiasm and joy, your delight at the thought that you might have conversations with Douglas and his colleagues and others at the University of Cambridge, James.
About Exodus.
In fact, it was meant to be about Exodus. And it was so sad to see that just dashed. And it was sad for me personally to see it for you, but it was sad to think about what that would what might not happen. And then it was not long after that you and your family had a very difficult time. And I know you've talked about this publicly, a long period of a kind of desert and illness and
some tyranny in there,
and some tyranny in there too. And it was one point in the sort of
I think Jordan.
end of that you and I had a chat on Zoom, and I could tell that you were really struggling, and you've given so much to so many people, opened things up for them, and I felt really saddened. It was difficult to see someone suffer, let alone someone you love and admire. And I remember just thinking, is there anything I could give to Jordan? I mean, I don't live close enough. I can go over and, I don't know, cook him a steak. I mean, we live too far away. And I'd had a few years earlier an experience during a Lent where a few friends, we had just gathered, I should say, before Zoom. We were on the old thing called the telephone. And once a week, we talked our way through the Odyssey with someone who knew a lot about it. And it was just a wonderful revelatory conversation and sort of reflecting on our own lives and own spiritual lives in relation to this great text. And so I remember writing to you, I don't know if it was September or whatever month it was, sort of the end of that summer, saying, would you like to try and have a conversation about, maybe some text? We could just choose something, And you, with a kind of amazing stroke, said, well, maybe that could be, maybe Exodus. We could talk about Exodus. It would be preparation for my lectures. I remember that. And then it sort of, it could have, fell by the wayside because then you really were feeling much better and you started traveling again and the tour and so on. But you didn't lose the idea. And it's not, the point of the story is not in the least that I feel somehow to take credit for this conversation. It's actually that, for me, those origins are very important to what's happening here. Origins of a kind of friendship. And my biggest reflection about our time together is how much deeper I feel this conversation has become for me. And one thing our listeners may not know is that in addition to the long period of time we've spent in this conversation, I've been joking, it was kind of about as long as the Israelites were in the desert. It was like a real-time length, but is that we've actually spent a lot of time outside of being on the camera and not just kind of getting ready to come into the studio, but social time where we've talked and
Jet skiing around.
we've had a lot of fun for sure. And to me, this is really what we've talked about our lives. You know, certainly we've gotten to know each other better. We've shared things about our personal lives and things that we're dealing with, you might say, and talked a lot about you know, exciting intellectual things. And my sense is that as we've done that, we've gotten to know each other better and also come to trust each other more deeply. And knowledge and trust are very closely related. And my own feeling is that deepening trust, in a sense, is also what enabled us to approach the text more and more deeply as we went into it, because we kind of knew that we knew something deeper about each other that enabled us to find something and help each other see something deeper in the text. And it seems to me that this is really profound, the fundamental sort of human truth that you both require friendship to seek high things. But it's also the result of that seeking, is that friendship becomes deepened by that. Absolutely. And, you know, people talk all the time, there's this, big mess in our kind of civic life, and social media is a big part of it, but it's not the only part of this kind of alienation. And people think as if in the midst of that alienation, you can somehow then talk about the most controversial thing that you would most disagree with. That's nonsense. There is no such thing as having an impossible conversation with someone you don't trust. If you want to go deep into something, you've got to have a place and a way of doing that with others.
Well, do you think that's any different than that establishment of a relationship with the vertical and the horizontal simultaneously?
No, I don't.
It seems like a recreation of the Mount Sinai ideal.
I think that's exactly right. And in some sense, I suppose, what I want to say to our listeners is what I think I want to say, what I've reflected on in ourselves, and that is, if you want to discover deeper things and go deeper, then there's a sense in which you can begin by lifting others up in a way, to sharing yourself with others in a way that allows you to create that horizontal, or that is itself, when you do that with others, you're already orienting yourself to something high, which is why it gives that horizontal life, that horizontal movement depth and power and truth.
It makes it foundational rather than sprawling.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, for that, I thank you all, and especially you, Jordan Peterson.
Great, Stephen. All right, Mr. Peugeot, looks like
Can I
you
say
have
something after that? I'm about to cry. That's going to happen.
You have the final word here, sir.
I have to say that the whole time we've been doing this, we've been going through this, one of the things, the thought that has come up and in the discussion is just how impossible what it is that we're doing. How can we be talking 16 hours about a book, and how is it that all these people want to watch it? And
Okay, yeah, so Eric, you're saying the horizontal could happen through policy. I totally agree, but the idea is that the policy will be bad and disastrous if there's not a proper vertical orientation happening first, right? So it's like you have to have this orientation with the divine or God or whatever you would want to call it, right? The highest ideal, right? You have to have that relationship dialed, and then through that flows a horizontal relationship that is functional, which would be policy. Any way you squeeze it, but it's just that if that policy is laid out without the popular vertical orientation, it's vertical orientation. You got to watch this. It's super interesting. They talk about it for like 16 hours, but the proper vertical orientation is in subservience to the highest ideal, right? So everyone has a highest ideal in their life. Different ones have different effects. If your highest ideal is getting high on heroin, obviously it's going to have a bad effect. If your highest ideal is the transcendent good of the world, right, or the in this specific situation, the spirit that calls you from tyranny or calls you to adventure, the Spirit of God, that orientation will yield a vertical policy that is going to work well. So, well, you could chat whatever you want. It's good faith, dude. Like, you could say what you want. I'm not trying to be a dick or anything.
how is it that we're doing it in a spirit of curiosity and of helping each other and of moving towards this unity? And
Yo, Eric, I don't know if you have Discord, but if you want, we can hop on Discord and do a video chat on here if you want.
I think that in some ways what I'm seeing happening now, this weird thing that we've been through is a concentration of something that started, at least for me, started when I encountered you several years ago. What I've seen is that there's a shift happening in culture. It's happening right now. And it's making things that were completely impossible before all of a sudden possible. You know, the fact that we notice that we're seeing the kind of just arrogant secular atheism recede in the popular perception. I thought that, I prayed for that to be possible, but I didn't see it as something that was going to imminently happen. The fact of watching young people in their 20s suddenly want to read this book, suddenly want to go to church, suddenly want to read the great books and just, once again, it's something that I prayed and hoped that would happen, but I didn't expect it to in some ways. And ultimately, I would say, you know, when I was in college, I realized that we had a problem. And one of the problems was, on the one hand, you had Bible scholars who argued about some little name in the text and where did it come from and who was the author and fighting over all this stuff, breaking down the story and the narrative. And on the other hand, I could see groups and churches trying to hold the narrative for themselves and make it useful only to their purpose. And what I dreamt of and I hoped for was the possibility of looking at the story of this text as something which is foundational for our very perception of reality, for the very way in which we, and being able to look at the narrative and eschewing those two problems. And we did it, and it's astounding. And I'm just completely amazed and grateful, honestly, to God, but then also grateful to you and to Daily Wire for making something that seemed completely unreasonable happen. And so, thank you.
All right, everyone watching and listening, that's exactly 1 hour, so isn't that just lovely? And thank you for all your concluding thoughts, and thank you to all of you who are watching and listening for your unexpected and very welcome time and attention. I hope that it serves you well, as it served us. To the Daily Wire Plus folks for making this possible and doing it so professionally, setting up this beautiful set and being on the ball technologically, being generous with the consequence, being generous with the resources. To all of those who've helped create the spirit of hospitality that has surrounded our venture, to all of you attending and participating, and to Larry Arnn and Ben Shapiro, who aren't here today, for not being the bloody stars of the show, but letting the whole enterprise carry on underneath its own impetus and letting the text be the star. That's a hell of a thing to see, and it's really something great, and it's been a privilege for me to be a part of this.
You're gonna cry.
And so,
Such a
on to the next
crybaby,
book,
dude.
gentlemen. Thank you very much, everyone.
Man, he's so emotional. Wow, that was good. That was good. Okay, so dude, Josh, you said only force horizontal, but vertical doesn't come through force, which should be a byproduct of the horizontal. I almost think it's the opposite, where I agree with you, the vertical shouldn't come from force, but I think that the horizontal comes from the vertical. So if you consent to the vertical, then the horizontal establishes itself. Like that's what happens in Exodus. That's kind of a lot of what happens with the covenant and everything with the 10 Commandments, right? Where it's like Moses has the proper orientation towards God, and then God gives him basically the law and the policy, or the horizontal, right? It comes from this. So it's like you have to like submit to that, and then you get this. And that's like how the US is based. That's like our freaking tenets are like based on that. Eric, oh, not tonight. Damn. I'm trying to send my Discord link, but I can't paste into the chat. So I'm wondering how I can do it. I guess I could just freaking type it out. Let me see. Hold on. Freaking just type this thing. Hold on. Figure it out, dude. Okay, hold on. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, I wonder if I can just send my or invite people. Oh, dude, send me your Discord name, and then I will send you a request. Like, Josh, so you're saying depending on your laws and your policy, that can give you the proper orientation to God if you have the right policy? Yo, Eric, just put your Discord name in the chat and I'll add you. Also, everyone here, if you click the link in the description, it's my weekly updates. I talk about this stuff a lot. It's free if you want to subscribe. If you give consent, are you saying give consent to the, if you give consent to the horizontal, then you will get the proper orientation with the vertical? But I feel like then the horizontal would have to be, what is the horizontal policy based in, right? If it's not based in a vertical orientation, it's going to be BS basically, right? It's not going to work. It's like, that's the point, is that the horizontal is going to be inevitably secular or bad, right? It's not going to work. And so I don't think you get the proper vertical orientation from a secular policy, right? You need a policy that's based in the vertical, right? And so I feel like you got a private way to send it. I'm not trying to make my private Discord public. Damn. Okay. Let me see here. Oh no, I think that we have a big misunderstanding. So the horizontal is like society. It's like, what is your society? What is your relationship to the people around you and your community and your state and your it's like the setup of your. Oh no, I see what you're saying, but I think it's just a misunderstanding. Yeah, Eric, I don't know what to tell you. I think if you go to DannySwade.com, there's a contact form at the bottom, and you can just put whatever you want in there. There's just a contact form at the bottom. So, yeah. So no, the horizontal is like your laws, your government, your society, how everything's set up, right? Like, what are the tenets of your society? Like in the U.S., we have the Constitution, right, and things like that. Yeah. So that's what it is. So it's like, yeah, that's the difference, is like you have a basically commitment to the highest ideal, right? And then through that flows governance that is functional. And like, that's the story of the covenant and the Israelites and like them, delegating the authority in the camp and like all that kind of thing. Siri trying to sell me after somebody else. You can help me better than you can about my grievances with the church, even though I grew up in the church. Yes, the same sort of nonsense. I don't know exactly what that means. I grew up in the church too, though. But dude, I'm not even arguing that this is real. Like, I'm not convinced that this is like literally real. I just think it's metaphorically true. That's why it's so interesting, because it's like, I love the example of Jonah and the whale, right? Where it's like, it's kind of crazy to think that like Jonah like got eaten by a fish and was like in the fish for 3 days, and then like there's no air, whatever. I don't know, he's in the fish. Doesn't make sense. It's obviously fanciful, right? But if you look at the metaphorical meaning of the story, which is, if there's something in your life you need to do, you should do it deep down, you should do it, which is like God telling you to do something, right? You need to do it. If there's something like that in your life and you walk away from it and you run away from it, it will swallow you, right? It will take you down to the depths, per se, right? Metaphorically take you down to the depths. But a lot of times, even if it does, you still end up with a path to redemption, right? There's still an option for redemption a lot of times, even if that happens, right? So that's just true about life, right? That's just a metaphorical truth about life, how life goes a lot of times, and what happens when you ignore things you need to do. So this story of Jonah illustrates that in just in a narrative structure, right? Which is how we learn. We're humans, like stories. That's how we learn and how we communicate and stuff. So that's basically the way Peterson approaches a lot of this stuff in the Exodus series, is looking at it through that lens. And it's super interesting and valuable. Like, you can think he's a narcissist. You can think it's not true. You can say what you want about him. But, it's like, if I learn these stories and maybe I don't think they're true, but I find that the meaning is true in my life, like it's literally true, it's literally what happens in my life, then, well, obviously that's valuable to understand things in that way. So that's why I like it. And that's why I think it's so interesting. Before I think you got on here, he's talking about the thing in the Old Testament where all the snakes come and bite the Israelites, and they're fiery snakes and poisonous, and they bite the Israelites. A bunch of them die and they get roasted. And rather than taking the snakes away, when Moses prays to God, God tells Moses to make a bronze serpent on a stick, and then everyone has to look at the snake, and then the poison won't kill him, right? And the snakes won't bite him. So whatever, you could say that's not a true story, but Peterson talks about how psychologically, which you could say what you want about Peterson, but he's a clinician, right? He knows what's up as far as therapy and like having a practice and dealing with psychological issues with people. So this story of the snake is true metaphorically, right? Where it's like you have to look at the things that scare you and encounter them voluntarily to transcend them, right? It's like that's how you get over fears. That's psychologically how you deal with things that bite you, right? Or that are scary or that cause you problems. You got to look at the problem. You got to face the freaking problem, right? That's just a psychological truth in life. Like everyone knows that's true. If you've ever overcome a fear, if you've ever dealt with something that was scary or hard, or you know what happens, and you know what happens when you ignore it, right? You get poisoned. And so it's like, that's just true about the world. It's just, and the Old Testament is just chock full of that. And I think that's a lot of the purpose of the Old Testament, and especially the Torah, is that metaphorical meaning that is wisdom, right? And so you can kind of conceptualize it however you like, but it's not a nothing burger. I think it's, just useful. It's just freaking useful. That's why I'm watching it. Just useful to understand in life, because life's hard and confusing and whatever. So that's what I'll say about that. You know what's funny too, Eric, is like, as much as you're a hater, it's like you've been on this the whole time. I don't know if you're still here, but you're like, okay, I'm leaving, and then you didn't. You probably said you were leaving like 4 times, and then you never did, because it's like compelling. I feel like you can't deny that it's compelling. But man, that series was a banger. That's on the Daily Wire for whoever else wants to go check it. Again, for the 6 people I still have here, if you click the link in the description, you can sign up for my blog, and I write about this kind of stuff all the time. I write about my life. I don't do social media, so it's the best way to stay up to date with me, and I share this type of content and talk about it a lot. So I would consider subscribing. It's free. Yeah. So that's what it is, and we're down to 5. I hate that I can't post a link in the chat. That's kind of lame. Or maybe if I... Oh, I can. That's my Discord. I just have to... It just Command V doesn't work. That's my room called The Clouds. So anyone who goes in there can video chat me. If anyone in there wants to have a conversation on live, feel free and let me know, and we can pop in there and we can talk on the live. I just ate 2 pizzas. Woo. I think next I'm going to watch the gospel series on there, on the Daily Wire thing. What if life is more like a garden? Check out this new song I made today. Or not today, but 555. I wish I did too. Wish I did too. Oh, you had cake? Cake sounds pretty good too, honestly. Demos, flower, demo. Here we go. What if life is more like a garden? Hey. More like peace and more like trees in the way it started. Hey, it's easy to think the things we say are what we mean, yeah. And I know that it's easy to see and just assume it's reality. But what if there was more to understanding? Maybe our definitions could use expanding. Maybe, yeah. What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like power?
And what if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, more like trees and the way it started. Yeah. Maybe that tree of knowledge isn't in a book, doesn't matter where you look or if you ever went to college. You'd think that what it means to know is more about what you've learned than how you grow. But maybe there is more to understanding. Maybe our definitions could use expanding. What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like hard facts, then like power. And what if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, more like trees and the way it started. Yeah.
Let's go.
Life is more like a garden. What if life is more like a garden? What if life is more like...
Hey. Nice. Yeah, that's a banger. I'm so stoked about that. I'm making a chill version too. That's just like piano vibes, and then I'm gonna film a video here. And
What if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, and more like trees and the way it started. Hey, it's easy to think the things we say are what we mean. And I know that it's easy to see and just assume it's reality. But maybe there is more to understanding. Maybe our definition could use expanding. What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like hard facts, then like power. What if life is more like a garden? More like peace and more like trees and the way it started.
pretty piano.
Maybe
Yeah,
that tree of knowledge isn't in a book, doesn't matter where you look or if you ever went to college. You'd think that what it means to know is more about what you've learned than how you grow. But maybe there is more to understanding. And maybe our definition could use expanding. What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like hard facts, then like power. What if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, and more like trees and the way it started.
Little birds in the background.
What if laughter's just a sunflower and love is just a rose? What if everything and all we need is right under our nose? I read these things on paper and pretend like it's not wood. I climb these walls for wisdom, whether or not I think I should. But if I could trust a garden to hold my life this far, then I'll count on trees to teach me things and see them for what they are.
Well, I was recording that demo last night. They're having music night in the house across from me, and you can just hear the drums sound checking in the background. It's like boom, boom, boom. But anyways, I got work to do on that. I think I might go on my other channel and work on that next. What if life is more like a garden? Let's just go for some other demos while we're here. What is this? Oh yeah, this is kind of hard.
You only got one chance, you got one chance, no eraser. Don't waste a life when a life's on the move. Yeah. Roll back tape, still chase it. Now I got gray hair with the pacemaker. All that Kodak film's misleading. Just move the hairline, bad days receding. What's it gonna take from you? Won't pay. What's the end taste like one day? If you know enough when your feet get stuck and you can't go back, might as well look up. That's my intention. That's a young man's pension. When you see the VHS, it feels something in your chest. Yeah, and I gotta pay attention to it. Try and be less sensitive. Yeah, I'm already dead. I'ma put all age to the test with no impatience. That's a lot of medications. 88 candles on my birthday. Okay. Ain't no way. That's the absolute worst kind of day. They got the generation. Might have had a life that you could say was fake. I've been loaded hella words up in my
vernacular.
20, 30, 40 shorties. I never got by with this. Still I'm on my knees and I ended up bleeding. Rushing to a maker that I'm skeptical of meeting. Let me put the break. Wait, looking for a way to suspend my ascension. That's my intention. There's a young man's passion. When you see the VHS, it feels something in your chest. Yeah, and I gotta pay attention to it. Try and be less sensitive. Yeah, I'm already dead. I'ma put all age to the test. No trial, take two. You only got one chance, you got one chance, no eraser. Don't waste a life when your life's on the move.
That's pretty good, honestly. I like that. I didn't like that last time, but that was pretty good this time. Let's see about this.
I'm back doing exactly what I want. I used to know how to do the right thing, but recently I forgot. Off my knees, moving my feet, wouldn't want to delay. The cleanse that I need is gonna take weeks to tell you all that to say. Ooh, when you invited trouble, you knew. Yeah. Free man, trust the God. I don't think that's enough. Then I rolls me up and takes my hand and tells me where to go. But I spent just enough time here to know it's a disaster show. Yeah. I'm back doing exactly what I want. I used to know how to govern myself, but recently I forgot. I try to say please, I try to make peace before I die and decay. I'm stuck in my head with only one left, there's only one and it's sad. You left your body open, I'm jumping right in. You said if we were lonely, yeah. And now you rolls me up, it takes my hand, it tells me where to go. Life's been just enough time you to know it's a disaster show.
Here's how I keep track of all my tasks.
Take me back to where I fall for cigarettes and ghosts that stare right on my toes and tell me what I wanna hear, and I watch my worries disappear. Free men trust their God, but I don't think that's enough. Yeah, the night rolls me up, takes my hand, it tells me where to go, but I know it's all a disaster show. Left your body open, I'm jumping right in. You said if we were lonely, yeah. The night rolls me up, it takes my hand, it tells me where to go. Life's been just enough time here to know it's a disaster show.
That's okay. How about, what's this?
Let no soul trouble me,
Yeah.
cause I got good mood with the
My
white
skyline inside coming through. Hey, on me.
Yeah, but sometimes sailing on the rough seas, I'm on capsize, but this is about time I find a fight in me. Cause it's getting tiring being so free. This blue light rain falling on my brain. Haven't seen the sky in days. Yeah, when everything exists on the spectrum, a wavelength is a lesson, and I'm just trying to harmonize and find unity with everything, all wrapped up in one big happening. It's buildings scatter light like a prism, but it's really all just a prison if you look at it simplified. Blind.
Hey.
Yeah, and baby, gotta move slow, putting on your halo.
Everybody says so. Hey, everybody say it.
Yeah. Now the ratio to signal to noise is flipped by the toys. We couldn't just keep in our pockets and verses. Hey, now it feels like humanity versus this blue light rain falling on my brain. Haven't seen the sky in days. Yeah, when everything exists on the spectrum, a wavelength is
Need
a
something going.
lesson,
Check it, check it,
and I'm just trying to harmonize and find. All wrapped up in one big happening. These buildings scatter light like a prism, but it's really all just a prison if you look at it simplified. And to ponder life as a calling these days is a far cry out from the garden. It's just chaos every day, covering your face to your taste, see, smell, feel, everything is fake. From the news to the views to the food and DNA. This a 20x crossroads, there's not even a way to get a thought in edgewise. Everyone's a wise guy, everyone and everything is funny when your soul dies. Brain in the blender, might as well surrender to the screen. And the person we all know is a pretender, like
That's pretty nice. Not gonna lie, it's pretty nice, yeah. Oh, it looks like I didn't even... Why is there no demo of this? Weird. Thought I did a demo of that.
come on. Well, maybe I've been knowing you since I was 25. Before I got all the time you weren't by my side. So will you wanna leave when it's a little bit sunny? Well, it's up to you.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know outside, but
Maybe it's a nice time.
turn and walk back to me. so long. You're gonna still be with me at the top, yeah, even if I don't.
Oh no. What's happening? I think I broke my thing. We were vibing.
Still care
There we
for
go.
you.
Ah, here we go.
From day one, you've been the point of my life. Oh, even when you hurt me so bad,
Sometimes it still feel nice. Hey.
you're my light in darkness,
But still my cold
and pain. And I know somehow, yeah, just a major part of me is on it. Turn and walk back to me.
Hey, you never said. You know that eventually,
Yeah,
you're gonna say, turn and walk back to me.
turn that head around.
Are you gonna watch me drown?
Yeah, when you hear me say, baby, why you gotta leave me on? You don't wanna listen to me talk, even when I'm sending up a prayer for you. Okay, you don't wanna wait so long. You're gonna still be with me at the top, yeah, even if I don't still care for you.
One, two, three, go. What a bop, man. That's a freaking bop. I gotta finish that. Oh, it was this that was the... I don't know if this one turned out good.
Yeah. Oh, baby, that's only half a smile. Yeah, you're running it. We both know I'm onto something. Put the show on hold. I just wanna know if I'm in your second guess. Oh, baby, that's only half a smile. Baby, you can show me the rest. Oh, and lately I can see a change that I'm hoping you keep feeling your chest. Oh, baby, yeah, that's only half a smile. And I know that if we're honest, it's kind of juvenile. Yeah, it's funny how you sell out a good vibe of 20. You can save your face, but you lose the race in the end when you pretend. It's only half a smile, baby. Show me the rest. Oh, yeah. Got a feeling that I'm hoping you can feel it in your chest. You're the brightest smile as it can happen when you didn't want it. Yeah, but baby, if you know what's good for you, let go when you got it. You got it. Oh,
It needs to go drums there. I can't even keep listening to it.
yeah, that's only half a smile.
It needs to go into like freaking drums right there. I can't even listen when it doesn't. It's sad. I can't believe I didn't do that. I'm silly. Okay, maybe one more. Who's still watching me? 4 people still watching me. That's crazy. Okay. No, it's not this one. What's the one that's this one maybe? Yeah, this is cool. That's just the instrumental. Whoopsies. Your day get a little bit brighter and nice. Here we go. I love pizza.
Your day get a little bit brighter and nice. You got life and you got hope. Yeah. Try as you might to just hide when you lose sight. It's alright. You don't know. Yeah. These rivers gon' run before we figure it out. It's Take your day in the sun and don't look down. Yeah, and say we're free to decide if anyone wants to go. You just can't.
It's so funny because you can tell compared to all those other demos, I'm singing this one really quiet and soft because I was singing it in the apartment back in Da Nang. So I sing quiet because I know the neighbors can hear me and shit. And then all these other ones, and then like if you listen to this, where is it? Oh, this one. If you listen to this, you can tell that no one can hear me and I'm just singing my freaking lungs out.
Come on. Well, maybe I've been knowing you since I was 25. Before that, I didn't know the time you weren't by my side. So if you wanna leave and it's a little bit sunny, well, it's up to you. Yeah, I don't go outside, but maybe there's a nice time. Turn and walk back to me. You never say, you know that eventually, yeah, you're gonna say, turn and walk back to me. Yeah, turn your head around. Oh, are you gonna watch me drown? Yeah, when you hear me say, baby, why you gotta leave me on? You don't wanna listen to talk, you don't wanna send up a prayer for you. Okay, you don't wanna wait so long. You're gonna still be with me at the top, yeah, even if I don't still care for you, baby. From day one, you've been the point of my life. Oh, even when you hurt me so bad, somehow you still feel nice. Yeah, you're my light in darkness, but still my cold and pain. And I know somehow, yeah, oh, it's a major part of me and my name. Turn and walk back to me. You never say, you know that eventually, yeah, you're gonna say, turn and walk back to me, yeah. Turn that head around. Are you gonna watch me drown? Yeah, when you hear me say, baby, why you gotta leave me on? You don't wanna listen to me talk, you don't wanna send up a prayer for you. Make it. You don't wanna wait so long. You're gonna still be with me at the top, yeah, even if I don't still care for you.
Sauce. I love it. It's so good. Okay, I think I'm gonna listen to this one more time, and then I'm gonna go work on music on my other channel. Whoa.
What if life is more like a garden? More like peace, and more like trees in the way it started. Hey, it's easy to think the things we say are what we mean. Yeah. And I know that it's easy to see and just assume it's reality. But what if there was more to understanding? Maybe our definitions could use expanding. Maybe, yeah. What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like hard facts, then like power. And what if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, more like trees in the way it started. Yeah. book, doesn't matter where you look or if you ever went to college. You'd think that what it means to know is more about what you've learned than how you grow. But maybe there is more to understanding. Maybe our definitions could use expanding.
I changed to music.
What if knowledge is more like a flower? Then it is like Harvard, then like hard facts, then like power. And what if life is more like a garden? And more like peace, more like trees and the way it started. Yeah. What if life is more like a garden? What if life is more like a garden? What if life is more like...
Oh yeah, so Fisher Grub. This is funny because we watched the Exodus series, but now I'm just jamming on music. But the thing is, it's not about his downfall. Actually, I think he's making a little bit of a comeback, more controversial and kind of more angry, I would say. But his Exodus series is freaking amazing, and I was watching it on live with everyone, and it's freaking awesome, dude. I'm telling you. I do think he, I wouldn't say he's having a downfall though, but he's, you know, he's becoming increasingly more polarized and criticizable. But, you know, no one's perfect. More like this, less like that. Who are my 5 ninja watchers? I've got 5 ninja watchers that will not say anything. Why is that? But I don't want to leave because I usually get no views. So I'm like, well, dude. Do I start a new? Less like this or like that. From day one, you've been the point of my life. Hey, for that I know the time you weren't by my side. You want to leave when it's a little bit... Oh, now everyone's gone. Oh, maybe it just wasn't updating. Okay, anyways. Bye, everyone.